My name is Rob Cameron, Technical Director over Security Intelligence at Juniper Networks. We work on analytics, automation, and attack mitigation. At least it's the 3 A's I could come up with, but we'll start with that. So my talk today is about staying in front of the microphone, and secondly, to talk about what I call fuzzy friends, or integrating third-party software into your solution. Now, this may be something that, again, we talk a lot about software and writing stacks and things like that, but not everybody here may be a software developer. If you're maybe perhaps like a network administrator or a security administrator, there may be several components into your solution that come together to bring your product, architecture, solution, whatever you want to call it, together. When you do that, you have to kind of determine the scope of trust about how much you want to trust those various players or actors in your security environment. So often, companies today are reaching over to open source and saying, hey, let's just take this, throw it into our product, put it in some of our proprietary code and get around the licensing and just see what happens. Well, really the challenge there is, how much do you trust that open source software? Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that open source is bad or isn't working, because it's something that companies use very successfully, including my company, which we based our operating system off of. But as you integrate those various components into your system, they add potential exploits or vulnerabilities. This is something very common as well in a lot of these web startup companies. Great products, great technology, great ideas, but they throw together, say, like MongoDB, Node.js, Ruby on Rails, and make a great application, never thinking about security. So in my spare time, I go to a lot of these hackathon events at different locations and locales that have a bunch of engineers and nerding out talking about things. And the one thing I never hear is security. I always hear, how can we get that awesome animation? How do we get that consistency of the data for the user? Security is very rarely discussed, because in a lot of cases, people just assume that the code that they're picking up is going to be secure. And unfortunately, that's not necessarily always the case. So when you're integrating code with open source, hey, great, do it, abide by the licensing, please, but please watch out for those potential issues that you can run into. Now, you can always rely on third-party software and go ahead and say, hey, let's bring in some professional libraries, some things we're going to pay for. And this also applies to various components like also routers, switches, the things that my company makes. And you put them into your solution. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean just because you paid a lot of money for it that it's actually going to be a really good product. Now, in the case of testing tools as well, you can have open source. Again, we talked about that, and you can also pay for them. So when you pay for these products, you really want them to work. Now, in a lot of the testing we deal with traffic generators. And sometimes those traffic generators can really push you to the breaking point of dealing with issues, because they're not going to generate the traffic that you would expect. So we go, customer has a scenario they want us to test. We go out, set the traffic generator up, everything works, it's great. We put it in production, and everything just craps out. Guess why? The traffic generator didn't work correctly. So when you're working with that, who do you test? It's like, who watches the watchman? Who tests the tester? So as some of the other speakers have discussed, when you're having a testing solution, you want some sort of checks and balances. Just don't fuzz something and run some garbage against it and say, hey, look, it crashed. Why did it crash? Where did it crash? What exactly happened to it? Because if you don't identify that, you may be fixing a bug, as some other graphics we saw, farther down the chain than actually where the bug occurs. When you're testing, don't think about that as an after fact, as a second thought. Think about it as part of what you do. A great story, as I used to work more and focusing on high availability solutions, is customers would spend millions and millions of dollars to have these geo-redundant data centers and all these locations and 7 layers of security and all this. And it's like, if you can't go up in the middle of the day while your CEO is talking and pull that cable or unplug that device, are you really sure it's going to work when there's a situation that you don't expect? So when you're looking at any solution, I don't care if it's software, hardware, a network, think about all the components that you're putting into it and were they tested? And we talked about also that scope of trust. I'm going to make this iPhone case is not bulletproof. It is designed to be dropped. So if I throw it on the floor, odds are it's going to work, and if it doesn't, I'm going to have a really sad week here this week. But if I went and shot it, of course I'm going to shoot right through, because it is not designed to do that. We have not determined that we need to test to that level of depth. So I bring up a screenshot here of some testing I was doing against an application I'm deploying in the cloud to do some analytics. And I ran about 500 million test cases using CodenomiCON against this web service. I ran it day and night. As in I was building releases, I would spawn new instances of CodenomiCON to test that, and kept basically the main core application running just to see where it would go. Now, do I need to do this? No. But the problem is, as Ari discussed, oh, sorry, Ira, I have it backwards. As Ira discussed, you don't know. As soon as you deploy something out in the internet, anything can happen. Now, we had the situation where we were deploying some of our new firewalls in a network, and there was this one application that didn't work. Now, unfortunately, this application is used by all the law enforcement agents to be able to look up into an FBI database to see if somebody's out there and causing trouble. Well, they happened to create this very specific type of packet, like 3,000 plus bytes in UDP. It wasn't TCP, so fragmentation, obviously, fragmentation would have to occur in either case, but there was no way to reliably transport that. So meaning that when our device started dropping the packets, because we didn't test that exact size of packet, there were a little bit of problems that the FBI network was taken out for that time being. So we were able to apply a patch and solve the problem, and it was in limited deployment, so no worries there. However, again, that's something that through fuzzing, through integrated testing, and through thinking about the things that can happen that we don't normally think about to occur to do. So running these extended types of tests are a really great value add for your customers to be able to find the problems in your product before the internet finds them. Because again, a million monkeys on a million keyboards and all that, definitely the customers are these issues will be found. Now, I love CodenomiCON. Who doesn't? We all have it. We use it. We sleep with it. It's a great product. But sometimes you just don't have the capabilities in that tool, not necessarily because it's a bad product, because maybe it's something you're doing something new. One of the data formats that I work with is called BSON, or it's a binary version of JSON, which is used by MongoDB. Unfortunately, today, code does not have a fuzzer for this. However, I'm sure by the time I get back to my seat, they will, because they're very rapid on coming out with these new features. Now, if I were to want to be able to implement an attack against BSON, and the reason for that is when MongoDB, if you're familiar, it's not familiar, it's a NoSQL database, it basically takes that chunk of BSON via the driver and just jams it right into your data set, meaning there's no checking, there's no execution. So good, no SQL injection and execution. Bad news is you may have this ticking time bomb of data sitting in your database. So what happens when the database goes to read this bad binary object? Could crash, could explode, could lose all your data. You don't know. But sometimes you have to go in and make your own test tools. Nothing wrong with it, but you want to ensure that the test tools test the way that you think they're testing, not just, again, that they work because you're super smart or you're the one person to solve that problem. And also work with vendors. If this is something that's very, very important, go to code and say, hey, I have this thing that I'm building. Can you help me? I'm working with this new competitor to Jamba Juice, and we have this new juice bar application, and it uses BSON to communicate. I'm worried that somebody will hack in and order all these free Frappa orange drinks. I don't know. Can you help me out with it? And companies will. And that's one of the things when we deal with CodenomiCON is we work with them as not a vendor selling us some stuff or trying to bug us to take us out to lunch, but as a partner helping us with the product, moving it forward. Because in the end, I'm not cheating myself by not doing this testing, I'm cheating my customer. And that customer pays for me to be here, pays for my hand rolls to eat. And I want to give them the best product, the product that they love. Because the reality is, we will never live in a land of unicorns, of defect-free software. We all hope for that day. But as long as people make things, people will be tired. They'll make mistakes. They'll miss that semicolon. A great example is this web online service launched running Node.js about, I don't know, 18 months ago. And they were really, really pissed off at Node. And it got into this Twitter flame war. And what happened is the programmer forgot to use var when declaring a variable, which in JavaScript makes that variable now global. So customer A comes in, logs in, and now you have a session. Well, customer B comes by and doesn't log in and has customer A's session. So when they went live, things got a little sad. And they were very pissed off at Node and whoever wrote it, and they cursed them. But the reality was 3 little characters, VAR, made that difference or not. It didn't matter the programming technique you used, whatever. Did you test it? Did you actually have 2 users log in sequentially when you're testing it? Probably not. So again, no matter what you do, we're always going to make mistakes. We're always going to have bugs. We're going to always have products that piss us off. But in the end, just ensure that when you're making a solution, you're making a product, you're making something, think about the customer. Think about the little bunny rabbit that will die if you don't get that fixed. Don't cheat your customer. make great software and product that people love. So thank you for your time. Thank you for Code for having the event, and I appreciate it.